Since at least the start of the 20th century, the average global sea ice level has been rising. Between 1990 and 2016, the sea level rose by 16 to 21 centimeters. More precise data gathered from satellite radar measurements reveal an accelerating rise of 7.5 centimeters from 1993 to 2017, which is a trend roughly 30 centimeters per century. The acceleration is due to mostly human-caused global warming, which is driving thermal expansions of the seawater and melting of land-based ice sheets and glaciers. Between 1993 and 2018, thermal expansion of the oceans contributed 42% to sea level rise. The melting of temperate glaciers was 21%, Greenland was 15%, and Antarctica 8%. Climate scientists expect the rate to further accelerate during the 21st century. Projecting future sea level is challenging due to the complexity of many aspects of the climate system. As climate research into past and present sea level leads to improved computer models, projections have consistently increased. Wow, big shocker, right? For example, in 2007, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change projected a high-end estimate of 60 centimeters through 2099. Wow, right? But their 2014 report raised the high-end estimate up to about 90 centimeters, which is still pretty crazy if you ask me. A number of later studies have concluded that global sea level rise of 200 to 270 centimeters this century is physically plausible. Isn't that scary? Although a conservative estimate of the long-term projections is that each Celsius degree of temperature rise triggers a sea level of approximately 2.3 meters over a period of 2 millennia. That's 2,000 years. An example of climate inertia. The sea level will not rise uniformly everywhere on Earth, and it will even drop slightly in some locations, such as the Arctic. Local factors include tectonic effects and subsidence of the land, tides, currents, and storms. Sea level rises can influence human populations considerably in the coastal and island regions. Further effects are higher storm surges and more dangerous tsunamis, displacement of populations, loss and degradation of agricultural land, and damage in cities. Natural environments like marine ecosystems are also affected, with fish, birds, plants losing parts of their natural habitat. Societies can respond to sea level rise in 3 different ways: to retreat, to accommodate, and to protect. Sometimes these adaptation strategies go hand in hand, but at other times choices have to be made among different strategies. Ecosystems that adapt to rising sea levels by moving inland might not always be able to do so due to natural or artificial barriers. Environmental migrants or climate refugees are people who are forced to leave their home region due to sudden long-term changes to their local environment. These are changes which compromise their well-being or secured livelihood. Such changes are held due to increased droughts, desertification, sea level rise, and disruption of seasonal weather patterns. Climate refugees may choose to flee or migrate to another country, or they may migrate internally within their own country. Despite problems in formulating a uniform and clear-cut definition of environmental migration, such a concept has increased as an issue of concern in the 2000s as policymakers and environmental and social scientists attempt to conceptualize the potential societal effects of climate change and general environmental degradation. Climate refugees do not really fit into any of the legal definitions of a refugee. Not all climate refugees migrate from their home country. On occasion, they're just displaced within their country of origin. Moreover, the refugees aren't leaving their homes because of fear they'd be prosecuted, or because of generalized violence or events seriously disturbing public order. Even though the definition of who is a refugee was expanded since its first international and legally binding definition in 1951, people who are forced to flee due to environmental change are not offered the same legal protection as regular refugees. The term environmental refugee was first proposed by Lester Brown in 1976. The International Organization for Migration proposes the following definition for environmental migrants. Environmental migrants are persons or groups of persons who, for compelling reasons of sudden or progressive changes in the environment that adversely affect their lives or living conditions, are obligated to leave their habitual homes or choose to do so, either temporarily or permanently, and who move either within their country or abroad.
On climate change, I saw the CBS interview. Still a little confused. So Don't be confused.
But when
Is he
you
confused?
look at like NASA, or you look at the Energy Department and what your own government, your own scientists have said about it, they said it's sort of indisputable that humans have contributed to global warming in big ways.
Well, I think we've contributed. We certainly contribute. I mean, there's certain pollutants that go up, and there are certain things that happen, certain things we do that if we weren't here, certainly.
They say the overwhelming cause for the last 50 years.
Well, I don't necessarily agree,
But it doesn't seem like in the report that there's that much of a may to it. Like, it's your government, right? It's your scientists. They work for you. It's your
that's
company.
okay. That's okay, and I want everybody to report whatever they want. But ultimately, I'm the one that makes that final decision.
Climate change and the effects of global warming with regard to the climate in California primarily revolve around issues such as drought and the subsequent risk of wildfire and related occurrences. A 2011 study projected that the frequency and magnitude of both maximum and minimum temperatures would increase significantly as a result of global warming. Paleoclimatology studies indicate the last 150 years of California's history have been unusually wet compared to the previous 2,000 years. Tree stumps found at the bottom of lakes and rivers in California indicate that many water features dried up during historical dry periods, allowing trees to grow while the water was absent. These dry periods were associated with the warm periods in Earth's history. During the medieval warm period, there were at least 2 century-long megadroughts with only 60 to 70% of modern precipitation levels. Paleoclimatologists believe that higher temperatures due to global warming may cause California to enter another dry period, with significantly lower precipitation and snowpack levels than observed in the past 150 years. A 2017 study published by the Journal of Geophysical Research projected that the sea level rise of between 1 and 2 meters will swallow between 1/3 and 2/3 of Southern California beaches. Expected increases in extreme weather could lead to increased risks of illness and death. From May to September 1999 to 2003, a study was conducted in the 9 California counties that found that for every 10 degrees Fahrenheit increase in temperature, there is a 2.6% increase in cardiovascular deaths. Climate change in New York could affect buildings, structures, wetlands, water supply, health, and energy demand due to the high population and extensive infrastructure in the region. A seaport like New York is especially at risk if the sea level rises. With many bridges and tunnels in the city, major facilities for aviation in the New York metropolitan area and the New York Passage Ship Terminal are also located in areas vulnerable to flooding. Flooding would be expensive to reverse. Tide gauge records indicate a rise in sea level about 50 centimeters since 1860. Rising temperatures can bring a higher risk of heat-related deaths from heat waves and increased concentrations of ground-level ozone, potentially causing asthma and other health concerns. The New York Times has identified climate change as a contributing factor in the city's increased level of rat infestations, stating that milder winters, the result of climate change, make it easier for rats to survive and reproduce. Oh, nasty. Well, that being said, in June of 2019, New York City made a climate emergency declaration. I don't blame them. The New York City's Mayor Office of Climate Policy and Programs team, who also manages the One NYC program, said in 2018 that it's pledging to reduce greenhouse emissions by at least 80% by the year 2050, and align with the 1.5 degrees Celsius target put into place under the Paris Agreement. Inroads have already begun, as the city's emissions have decreased 15% since 2005. Good job, New York. The aim is to develop low-carbon transportation options and mandate retrofits to city buildings. The team has also sued the 5 companies, BP, Chevron, ConocoPhillips, ExxonMobil, and the Royal Dutch Shell, most responsible for climate change and divesting the city's pension funds from fossil fuels, the first major city to do so. The One NYC program, as of 2018, made progress toward renewable energy reliance. For instance, solar installations have increased 6-fold since 2014. $500 million was invested into improving building energy efficiency, and an additional $1 billion allocated to preserving NYC's drinking water. Oh, nice.
Newfoundland ground to a complete halt today. A powerful blizzard packing strong winds and immense amounts of snow made travel nearly impossible there. Power was knocked out to tens of thousands of homes. People in St. John's are used to some stormy weather, but as Ross Lord reports, some are calling this the worst snowstorm in memory.
Regions across Canada are already experiencing climate change. Atlantic Canada is one region in Canada most threatened by global climate change. The region will experience more storm events, increasing storm intensity, rising sea levels, storm surges, coastal erosions, and flooding from a warming in global temperatures. Moreover, coastal communities, which make up much of the population in Atlantic Canada, are the most vulnerable to these impacts. Climate change impacts will have significantly adverse effects on the vital infrastructure and industries which contribute to the socio-economic well-being of Atlantic communities, most notably in the fisheries and tourism industries.
It started last night with the first of 60-plus centimeters of snow in St. John's, all whipped into a thick blizzard by menacing winds, blowing steadily at 80 kilometers an hour and gusting to 120. The first big snowstorm in the Newfoundland capital this winter.
Probably one of the worst we've had in the last 15 years, if not the worst.
Even for Canada's windiest city, this is remarkable. The winds blew off part of the roof from this supermarket and have shaken houses, setting off home security alarms. Amid widespread power outages, whiteout conditions forced schools, the airport, government offices, and businesses to close. Many discovered moving it was futile when the snow drifted back in. Still, Newfoundlanders persevere.
It's fantastic. I love it.
With some of their own vehicles buried, police speak from experience in advising drivers to stay off the roads.
The snow has seemed to change to rain right now, which could produce black ice conditions. We're advising motorists to travel only if absolutely necessary.
City officials brushed aside early suggestions of declaring a state of emergency or calling in the army. Newfoundlanders had lots of notice, and most hunkered down, some even using the storm to cool their favorite beverages for a long weekend. The storm that gained intensity as it came across from northern Ontario and Quebec, bypassing the Maritimes.
It's the pressure in the storm is so deep that you're seeing very, very strong winds, which are, gusts up to 120 kilometers an hour. And those are the criteria that you need for things like blizzard warnings, which is
the social, economic, and cultural health of central Canada is strongly influenced by our climate. For one, the effect an overall warmer climate could have detrimental effects on heat-related illnesses in the dense metropolitan areas of Quebec and Ontario. The health of Ontario and Quebec residents has and will continue to be increasingly at risk of illness. Injury and premature death from such climate-related events as heat waves, smog episodes, and ecological changes that support the spread of vector-borne illnesses. The prairie region, which supports one of Canada's most important industries, agriculture, could also be one of the most vulnerable to changes in the climate. The prairies are Canada's major dry land, and changes in precipitation patterns can dramatically impact agriculture in the region. Recent trends and future projections include lower summer stream flows, falling lake levels, retreating glaciers, and increasing soil and surface water deficits. A trend of increased aridity will most likely be realized through a greater frequency of dry years. That said, irregular precipitation patterns can also lead to dramatic flooding as seen recently in Manitoba. In turn, agricultural production as well as gross farm income could be an increased risk of extreme weather events, and the increasingly frequent presence of agricultural pests and disease, especially given the increasing use of agricultural and livestock-related water use. This instability in rainfall could be highly detrimental to some of Alberta, Manitoba, and Saskatchewan's most important industries. The regions of Western Canada are very vulnerable to climate change-related extreme weather events. The increasing frequency of forest fires, storm surges, coastal erosion, landslides, snowstorms, hail, drought, and floods could have devastating impacts on the critical infrastructure of British Columbia and Alberta. Already, the northern migration of the mountain pine beetle and record-setting forest fires have had adverse impacts on the forestry and tourism industries, impacts which are expected to continue.
It was wicked and it was intense. You can see it coming in, the sheets of rain sweeping across the city.
Oh my God!
Although the warnings were there, nobody could have predicted just how wild it would be.
We had some pretty good indicators. We had watches issued fairly early in the day, and they were upgraded to a warning once we realized how intense it was going to be, but I don't think anyone really expected it to hit with quite the ferocity that it did. Some parts of the city absolutely slammed with hail. We had a very intense lightning.
Even first responders were caught off guard, scrambling to manage the overwhelming calls to emergency.
911 answered 246 calls. This is 6 times the average call volume that they receive at this time. And fortunately, it occurred during a shift change, which allowed 911 staff that were oncoming and off-going to be able to answer calls.
crews attended hundreds of incidents, even having their own troubles getting to the scenes as they too were forced to navigate through the storm.
Because of the way the storm came through the city, there is widespread impact through the city. We know when the rain initially hit and the heavy water hit, those trouble spots were around primarily catch basins and through flooded roads and through the downtown core.
The severe weather always compels viewers to grab their phones and capture video of the storm's movement. The pelting rain, the toonie-sized hail, and the powerful winds all caught on tape.
The lady's just walking her way out of that mess. It's like a river down.
This woman tried to wade through the knee-deep hail. A good Samaritan eventually moved through it, making a frozen path to reach her.
That's like insane. She's gonna walk there, look at that.
This blinding storm lasted about an hour, but the damage will linger for a whole lot longer. Jill Croteau, Global News.